Housekeepers working for motels, hotels, resorts, or cruise ships. What is the most what the fudge weird or awkward situation that you've stumbled into at work? I worked at this one hotel, and a guy bought in a mini propane grill and started grilling chicken in his room. We found out when the whole hall started to smell delicious. Unfortunately, we did have to make him stop. I was the night manager, and housekeeping told me there was blood on the walls. I went to the room and, oh my god, the girl was shooting something up, and obviously the blood had sprayed everywhere. She tried to extend her stay. Turns out she was just a really crafty working girl. She'd have the first John pay her room through Expedia, use it all night, and then use the money to stay again. She was permabanned after the blood, though. I worked with a woman who was the head of housekeeping for a large hotel in the area who told me this story. There was this woman and her daughter who were local but checked into the hotel for a few days. One of the housekeepers came in to service the room one morning while the mum was outside by the pool. The housekeeper walked in and found the girl in bed with blood everywhere. Turns out the girl came to town to have an operation to not have the baby, and mum needed to hide it from dad. The girl started hemorrhaging in her sleep while mum was already outside the room, and the housekeeper actually found her in time to save her life. The housekeeper was too distraught after all was said and done to clean the room. I can't remember if she quit or not. Another housekeeper was brought in to finish. My mum was a hotel general manager, and I basically grew up in hotels. The worst was a man who strung himself up in his hotel room on Christmas Eve. He had driven through the night to see his kids for Christmas, and his ex wouldn't let him see them. So he went back to his hotel room, set up a rope, and decided he didn't want to be alive anymore. My mum is still traumatized over finding that body. After that, she organized a party in the hotel lobby for every Christmas Eve, and always invited all of the guests to try and get people out of their rooms and lift their spirits if they were spending Christmas in the hotel. Rough time of year for a lot of people. Your mum sounds like an absolute peach, though. Says a lot that instead of just battening down the hatches, she tries to use her experience to bring people out of what can be a very hard holiday for lonely people. I have a few, I guess. My favorite was when I wasn't working. I actually just got off my shift. When a large wedding party came back late at night, absolutely trashed, and eventually they all went into their rooms. A while later, the current desk person got a call to the 4th floor immediately. Turns out one woman's boyfriend locked her drunk butt out of the room, completely undressed. Not one to complain, she decided to sleep it off on the couches we put up in the elevator areas on each floor. Still undressed. My coworker went and put a blanket on her, and she woke up and said she was going to sue. She peed on the couch and then threw up on it, and eventually we got her back into her room. The next morning, she was so embarrassed, she ran past the front desk to leave. We had an undressed drunk guy in the hall a couple of months ago. Couldn't find his room, so he was knocking on doors, waking up random guests, thinking their rooms were his. Completely shameless, though. Checked out in the morning at the front desk, acting like nothing had happened. He was a business traveler, too. The housekeeping staff at the hotel I used to work at would put all the adult toys they found in a box. It was a tradition to wrap the box and give it to our female boss at the Christmas party. People leave behind their bedroom equipment? That stuff's not cheap. Yeah, some people leave behind some very expensive toys, but when it comes to that, they usually come and get them. I once witnessed a woman blaming the reception staff for her husband catching a taxi to the airport without her. I have no idea if they'd been arguing. It's not the place of staff to pry. I used to work in a park with facilities for the campers that had to be cleaned every morning. One morning, the janitor, we'll call him Jose, came into work and started by cleaning the bathrooms. When he came to the men's bathroom, a ranger saw him go in, come back out, put on a hazmat suit, and go back in. This actually wasn't as abnormal as you'd think, considering we get a lot of weirdos doing turd art on the walls. Anyway, Jose finishes up, heads over to the next set of campsites. Later that day, some campers find a body in the woods right behind the bathroom. Sure enough, some guy had been unalived in the bathroom. The police were not happy with Jose. Former hotel worker here, please check under your mattress if you stay in a hotel, because the odds are the housekeepers aren't bothering to lift up the mattress like they should. After you've lifted said mattress, go ahead and enjoy the copious amounts of adult magazines that are left there for you. Seriously, people leave adult magazines and DVDs under those mattresses all the time. Quite often, it's a regular guest who requests the same room, and it's just their stash because they know the small Nepalese housekeeper won't lift the mattress even a little bit. Okay, update. Apparently some of you are taking the enjoy the copious amounts of free adult material as a literal statement. It was meant to be sarcastic, as at least for myself anyway, handling some stranger's random magazines for my own personal pleasure just seems unappealing. Oh, my top 3 were, in order, painted landscapes across 3 of the 4 walls, painted in number 2. Surprisingly talented. Used Johnnies placed over every light bulb in the room. I didn't actually discover until the rubber prophylactic started to burn. And finally, I had an employee give out the wrong keys to a room. The parents gave the keys to their small children, they ran ahead and opened the door, and inside was a couple performing what we shall simply say were very high-end costumed acrobatics, complete with ball gag and riding crop. I'm sure this is way worse at the low-end hotels, but I managed a Marriott and the standards are high, so some adult material under the mattress was one of a few really bad things we'd find. Every now and then a syringe would be found, but thank goodness that was housekeeping doing their job and not a guest finding it. When I was younger, I worked night reception in a really crappy rundown hotel. I took over the night shift from the afternoon shift and was given my handover. As per usual on the weekends, we had our late checkouts and wake-up calls for airport transfers. Come 2:45 a.m., I called the guests in room 3405, but I got no answer. Tried again a few more times and still nothing. Now, as I'd mentioned, this being such a crummy, -3-star, rat-infested hotel from hell, we had a total staff of 1. Me. So off I went, up 3 floors with the master key to fetch Mr. Collins. I knocked 3 times and got no answer, so I went in. What I saw next will haunt me forever. Across the room in the double-doored fake mahogany closet was Mr. Collins, completely undressed in a standing position, knees bent, shoulders slumped on the inside of the closet, with a belt attached around his neck, buckle side attached to the closet rail, eyes closed and a great big smile on his face, dead as a dodo. So, first aid training kicked in. I knew it was for nothing. The guy was as cold as a well-digger's butthole. Called the ambulance and started CPR, but it was obvious the guy wasn't coming back. Paramedics took over, but he was pronounced dead straight away. Working in the hospitality industry, you somewhat prepare yourself for grannies passing away in the middle of the night and the odd heart attack here and there, but never that sort of thing. In short, guy unalived himself while tickling his pickle with his belt around his neck. Couldn't be saved. One of my co-workers was vacationing in Mexico and decided buying green herb was a good idea, and leaving said herb in a backpack in his hotel room. When they returned to their room, the cops were rushing in and out of there. He began to panic because he was sure he had got busted for substance possession and that he was headed for a Mexican jail. The cops asked if this was his room and rushed them in. They told the guys to pack up and that they were getting a new room. The room was dark, so my friend opened the blinds. Someone had jumped from their balcony and landed on theirs, thus exploding all over the glass door. That's a very complicated and weird sort of relief, I imagine, and one that would probably make you feel very guilty in the days to come afterwards. I bet the guy rushed that green herb out of there as quickly as possible. No way that it didn't smell. I work as a housekeeper at a casino during the party hours, and I've been there for a while. I have so many stories to share from how crazy it is there, it's pretty hard to believe the crap I've seen. One in particular, I got called to go close down a restroom because a young woman was having a medical emergency right there. I also had an older gentleman ask me if I had a boyfriend while I was cleaning the restroom and we were alone, and he grabbed me and kissed me. He was later escorted out with his wife. I'm a dude, by the way. I've also been attacked by a pantsless man, seen women go number 2 on the floor in front of me, and a nice intoxicated man deciding it would be funny to pee on people on the balcony below. I've been here for a while and I have so many stories from that crazy place. I don't plan on leaving anytime soon because it's just so interesting. Although as a housekeeping note for any of my customers, please stop standing so far away from the urinal. You will literally leave a puddle of number 1 and then I have 50 people all doing it every minute. You guys are killing me. Also, a good amount of people who crap on the ceiling. It amazes me the projectile range that these people have. Not a big thing, but something I'll always remember. I worked as a housekeeper in a 4-star hotel. It was quite an expensive place, and we often had rich guests from the Middle East. This will become relevant. The hotel, of course, had a spa area, and it was my duty to close this area at about 10 p.m., meaning to shoo the last guests out of the pool and sauna, clean everything, and close it down. One time I went to see if there were any guests still in the sauna, and when I opened the door there was a woman and man, I assume they were husband and wife, sitting inside. He was undressed, only with a towel around his waist, and she was fully veiled, wearing a head-to-toe chador inside a 90-degree sauna. Needless to say, I was surprised. I don't care about religious clothing rules, to each his own, I guess, but sitting inside a sauna fully veiled surely made me raise my eyebrows a bit. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. Never worked at a hotel, but I delivered pizzas to them. This one time, this guy orders a pizza in the most rundown hotel in town. I go out there. He says, "Come on in." I usually will not go inside places, but for whatever reason, I took one step in. There's a girl sitting in a haze on the bed, like non-responsive staring, wearing only her undies. I got my money and left, not saying anything. I got halfway to the car and the guy leans out and says, "Hey," and gestures for me to come back. I'm a little nervous at this point as he's hanging out of his door. He could have a piece in his other hand for all I know, and he only approached halfway. He comes all the way out with more money, thankfully not a weapon of his own, and he says, "Hey, have a little extra tip. That working girl gave me a discount when she saw the size of my eggplant," with a big old smile on his face. I'm not sure if the discount was because it was big or small, to be honest. Now, I know full well that I shouldn't have touched this nasty, substanced-out working girl and sleazy dude's money, but of course I did. Oh, and another time I delivered to the Holiday Inn Express, the nice hotel in town, and my receipt said room 202. I knocked, they opened the door, paid for the pizza, and all, no problem. Got a decent tip out of it. I got back to the shop and my boss says, "Where the hell have you been? 212 just called and said you didn't deliver." Now, I'm confused because I just delivered to 202 as my receipt says. Turns out my manager wrote the room number down wrong. I took the pizza to the wrong guy and he just paid for it. So I called 212 and apologized and explained the mix-up. I make his pizza and run it out to him. When I get there, he tells me that management has been involved because he called 202 and said, "Hey, I think you got my pizza," and 202 said something to the effect of, "It's my pizza now, and if you want it, you'll have to come and take it from me." Very odd character, that 202. Anyway, I gave him the pizza for free because of the problem. He felt bad for me and gave me a $20 tip. So basically, the screw-up got me a funny story and a great tip. I worked as a night auditor for a small-town chain hotel in the early 1990s. One night, a nicely dressed businessman checked in on my shift. He came back to the desk a few minutes later and rented a few movies. We had VCRs in the rooms back then. One of the movies was The Hunt for Red October. It had just come out on video. The evening went pretty uneventful, but the next night when I came to work, I received the news. Sometime during my shift, he had deleted part of his own head with a deagle while in his bed. No one heard or saw this happen, and he was found by a maid at about 1 p.m. the next day, and he had bled out. None of the maids would clean up the mess. I went into the room and could see the huge pool of viscera on the bed and floor. It took them over a week to clean the room. It smelled terrible. As it turned out, the blood leaked under the floor and under the bed in the adjoining room that we'd still rented out, without knowing there was coagulated blood on the floor. We just kept airing the room out and spraying a lot of air freshener. To this day, I have never seen The Hunt for Red October. I worked for a small golf resort for several years, and this story still burns a hole in my brain every time I tell it. So we have these small hotel rooms that contain 2 beds and a bathroom. I serviced, like fresh towels and stuff, for 3 days and everything was normal. On checkout day, 6 men checked out. I saw them meet up with their wives and girlfriends who weren't staying with them at the front desk as I was clocking in. I walked into the unit after they'd left and there was doo-doo and blood smeared everywhere. The walls, the sheets, the shower, and even the TV. There were about 20 rubbers laying out on the heater attached to the wall. As I was removing the sheets to throw them away, 2 butt toys with rubbers still on them flopped out onto the floor and one started vibrating. It had to be the most disturbing mess I had to clean up. And when I notified the front desk manager, he refused to bill them for leaving such a huge mess to clean up and said, "This is a place where people come to relax. If they want to let loose, then so be it." I was so mad. Which situation should I share? Alright, so a few girls and myself teamed up and cleaned these cottages for a state park. I usually clean bathrooms because the girls don't wanna, and I'd rather do it because screw it, you can just bleach everything and not have to worry about if crap in the kitchen is missing. Anyway, cleaning the bathroom when I heard my coworkers gag and tell me to come to the bedroom. I walk in and instantly smell something more foul than a chicken house. I look at the bed and there is a bloodstain almost 4 feet wide at crotch level, center of the bed. Oh boy. And no body anywhere to be seen. I have a feeling that this may be one of the more extreme examples of one of our patients who tripped and fell from the many medical videos we've done on this channel. I hope that the person was okay and that they actually went to get the medical help they clearly needed. I work at a 7-story hotel in Illinois, and one night a man tried to climb out of a 7th-story window to the roof, a real daredevil. He fell to his death, and the scene that followed was one of the most what the fudge moments of my life, and really changed my perception of people in general. It turned out that while climbing out of the window, his girlfriend tickled him, causing him to fall. Later, when outside, she screamed that over and over, "I didn't mean to make him fall, I was only tickling him." I thought that she had just died crying. In their panic, the remaining 4 people in the room took the elevator to the basement instead of the ground floor and proceeded to punch holes in the wall because they were so laced out on substances that they couldn't find their way out. One got out, but the rest were down there for over an hour. When the woman finally got outside where I headed after calling the cops, she literally clawed at me and begged me to do CPR in spite of the geyser of blood coming out of this man's mouth. He was obviously done. It was a confusing and chaotic night after that. I was the manager on duty, so I was the one who let the police into the room. I watched the police chaplain gather up all of the substances and paraphernalia into a shopping bag, and he did a thorough search as well. There was so much stuff, more substances than I've ever seen before or since. It took hours to clean everything up, and the last thing to happen was the fire department hosing the red stuff away. What was so what the frick that changed my view on people? The official police report stated that substances were suspected to play a role, but none were found in the room. It was just stated that the man fancied himself a daredevil, and others in the room didn't notice he was gone for several minutes. All total lies. I'll never believe another police report as long as I live. I'll never believe another news story, even a small one. What happened and what was reported was so different, I wondered if something had happened at another hotel on the same night. So not a funny story, but one of the most what the frick nights of my life. I was never even interviewed by the police other than giving them the information that I'd been given at check-in, and no, I was never interviewed by a reporter. I even called the paper a few days later and asked if they were interested in what really happened. They were sort of, meh, and never got back to me. What a disconnect from reality. This was just a small incident in a huge city, and now when I see major stories on major news sites, I can't help but think of the misinformation that must increase exponentially. I'm a supervisor at a hotel. 2 weeks ago, I got a call in the middle of the night from one of the bellmen telling me he needed help. I threw on some clothes and ran over, I live across the street, to find a drunk guy passed out in one of the lobby bathroom stalls amongst the single most foul odor I've ever smelled. I couldn't remember his room or who he was with. Turns out he'd decided to go number 2 in the hallway and then fell in it, smearing it all over himself and the floor. It ended with me having to call the cops and him calling me mean. That was actually the second time a drunk guy relieved himself of his solids in our hallway. Also, a housekeeper once found a working girl's menu of the services she performed, as well as a bag full of butt toys. There's an Indian casino near me that was originally a casino. They then built a hotel. As a soft opening, they invited tribe members and their families to stay for the weekend, just to work out any problems before they opened to the public. As it turns out, they had to re-renovate an entire floor of the hotel because they found that 15 out of the 23 rooms in one of the floors turned into a makeshift crystal lab over these 2 days. All the people that stayed in these rooms were family members of the people that worked at the casino, and it was swept under the rug and nothing ever came of it. I did maintenance for a hotel for a few months. The owner and his wife were both involved in the business. I walked into a room where the curtain rod was torn down. In there was the owner and our 18-year-old front desk worker. He gave me $2,000 in cash to not tell his wife. My brother worked in a bigger hotel in the center of Amsterdam. He was a minibar filler for the rooms, so they normally knock about 3 times before going in. He had one room, no answer, so he went inside to start filling up the minibar. As he goes in, he sees a small black case in the middle of the room. A second later, a skinny, undressed guy pops up from behind the wall, holding an adult toy and stuffing euros into my brother's hand. At this point, my brother sees the money and plays along for the moment. The guy opens the briefcase and pulls out a gigantic toy from it and starts inserting this massive thing into his now pulsing behind. My brother stands there in slight awe as the guy tells him to wait and stuffs more money into his hand. This is all happening very quickly. Next thing my brother knows, he's holding a lot of money now. The guy has placed himself on a small stool and is begging my brother to start whacking him on the butt with one of those table tennis bats from Heck, black leather with metal pins on it. My brother sees the money again, starts smacking the guy on the butt like 3 or 4 times before hitting him so hard he falls off the stool. My brother leaves with the money and the guy is still begging for more. Brother tells management and the guy is banned from the hotel. I've never laughed as hard as I did hearing the story. He made a lot of money, but still kind of felt like he had turned into a rent boy. What's the creepiest thing you've ever found in an old building? Went to an abandoned hospital. There was a large square staircase spiraling up to the roof on the outside of the building. Locked steel door at the bottom, so the only way up was to climb the outside up to the first landing. My buddy boosts me up. I climb over, and there's a sleeping bag with a steak knife next to it on the landing. I call down, we're definitely not alone here, dude. No, but it's cool, says a voice behind me, scaring the crap out of me and causing me to jump and whirl around. There's a young, dirty, homeless-looking guy just standing there, coming down the stairs from above, hands up, palms out. I didn't mean to scare you. He takes a seat on the stairs, so I carefully step on the handle of the steak knife, lean down over the edge, and pull my friend up. We had planned to sit on the roof and drink beer, so we offer homeless guy a beer, which he gratefully accepts, and we shoot the crap on the landing for a while. We're talking about the city, the cops, traveling, life in general. He's basically a drifter, been in town for a week or so, but a nice guy. Things are going pretty well, and then he asks, "You guys are human, right?" I friggin' hate it when I meet people that end up being aliens. You never know until you peel their skin off. They've been after me a long time, you know. They don't stop. They never stop. Sometimes I think I should just kill everyone to be safe. He's definitely not joking, and there's an uncomfortable silence as my friend and I realize this guy is freaking crazy. "Yeah, man," I say, "we're human. We just wanted to check out the place and drink some beer. We're gonna go ahead and move on now. We definitely don't want to be any trouble." He just stares in silence, so we leave him the last beer, carefully back up to the railing, jump down and walk away very quickly, constantly looking back over our shoulders the entire time. He's just standing there, still and silent, watching us leave. That place is still abandoned 5 years later, and we've never been back. I'm not a believer in the supernatural, but humans can be deceptive and dangerous in ways that you can't see coming. Holy crap! This guy seemed chill, but meeting people like him is what makes me tense when reading these stories. Ghosts? Monsters? Screw that, I'm worried about meeting some unpredictable creep or a Satanist mid-ritual. Also, serial killers. I wonder how many of his ilk I pass in normal places every day. Definitely don't want to meet them anywhere, especially alone in a dark abandoned building. That's a cool story for sure though. A group of my friends and I explored an abandoned asylum/mental hospital a couple of years ago in the OKC metro. It was very unsafe at night for a silly college freshman like us. The first experience we had was all of us taking our merry time enjoying the darkness and generally messing around. You have to come in through a broken window, and we were all gathered at the window just being dumb when we hear loud, echoing footsteps down the hall running toward us. We all did that. Who the heck isn't here? Who's messing with us? Look and turn, and after realizing that we're all present and none of us are sprinting down a dark, abandoned hallway, we booted it out of there. The second time we could hear a group of people messing with us, jumping from around corners and such, but they never got too close. We assumed it was an animal at first, but got brave and realized it was a person. We managed to catch them, and after staring at a collection of seemingly drugged-up 20-somethings who begged us for cans of paint and cigarettes, we got the not-so-good vibes. Finally, you say? And we tried to leave. The leader of the haunted asylum cronies asked if we had jewelry, which we denied. He then said the creepiest thing I've heard in my life. "I like jewelry. I take it off the girls here when they sleep." We fricking bolted. What? Why ever did he run? Seemed like a nice, well-adjusted fellow. People these days are so judgmental. I'm kidding, of course. I wouldn't blame you if you were still running, guy who wrote this story 6 years ago. Nothing big, but I was once exploring a drainage tunnel with friends. We were pretty deep inside of it and turned a corner to see someone leaning against a wall with a hat on. It ended up being a sandbag someone dressed up, but it scared the crap out of me because it was pretty deep in there. There were pants and shoes and a jacket with a hat on it. I don't know what they did to make the jeans look like legs because I didn't touch it or go back. A friend of mine went back and told me it was a sandbag and I was already done for the day. So someone a long time ago went in there and dressed up a sandbag just so someone else would be spooked? We were kids exploring an underground flood channel. There were spots we could climb up and dangle our arms out of the storm drains on the street, but that required crawling up weird diagonal tunnels. There were 4 of us, maybe 12 years old, 1 flashlight. The walls were all graffitied with a lot of gang stuff and even warnings to turn back. Blah, blah, blah. We just interpreted that as other kids being bored. We got to the spot where the ceiling angled down quite low to the point the opening was so small we had to crawl to continue. Challenge accepted. It looked like it opened up again shortly, so we crawled through 5 to 6 feet of the low area when it opened back up. It looked like we were in a large round concrete pipe. Before it was square or rectangular. Still lots of graffiti. We started yelling and playing with the echoes. Then we thought we heard something, so we got quiet. Then a real loud, "You're gonna fricking die," came echoing from the darkness. The kid with the flashlight ran so fast, the rest of us were left in absolute darkness. Anyways, this was the first time we passed the low spot, but the last time we went down there. None of us died that day. The rest of us ended up quietly and slowly walking out in the darkness. This isn't urban exploration, more rural exploration, I suppose you could call it. I was working on a project for a photography project. There was a massive forest up a mountain near where I live. Said forest contains an abandoned hospital that was shut down after an unexplained death. No, I'm not joking. So it's a crappy day weather-wise. I'm in a wood with a camera and a packed lunch ready to go wandering. After a few hours, I found a small camp with some abandoned tools, including a massive bolt cutter. Someone had tried to destroy them in a fire, but that was a no-go. Maybe 200 to 300 meters away, I found a burned-out car. Not an uncommon sight in the area. Kids buy super crappy, clapped-out bangers and trash them up there. Not far away, about running distance, I found a pair of woman's jeans. And a little further away from that, maybe 5 meters or so, there was a pair of panties hanging on a low branch. They'd clearly been there for a while. I'm not sure how long underwear would last exposed to Irish weather, and these were right out in the open, but a few weeks maybe? Pretty creepy finding all of that alone in the woods. I flipped through local news for anything on any break-ins, assaults, or anything suspicious, and couldn't find anything that had happened recently. For the record, I did contact police, but they pretty much told me it was just littering, no actual evidence of any wrongdoing. My friends, who always go exploring, told me about this time that they were just following a trail that went up into the hills, and after almost reaching the freeway, they ended up near an old closed-up train tunnel. They were able to squeeze through some of the loose fencing, and after wandering through with nothing of interest, they eventually came to a bunch of shipping containers. They told me that when they glanced inside, they saw a ton of weapons and ammunition in one, and just a crap ton of heavy boxes in the rest. After a few minutes of checking it out, they heard voices from further down the tunnel coming closer, so they got out of there. They also said it almost smelled like the ocean toward the end, so the tunnel might have led out near the beach. The place they hiked to was somewhere between Santa Barbara and Oxnard in California. As they stopped on the 101 going southbound and started their hike and ended up returning to the car and going to Oxnard at the end of the day. They made a report to the police, but I haven't heard of anything coming of that on the news or otherwise. Also, some people said it might be smugglers, but given that the crates were unlocked, the tunnel was unguarded, and it was accessible to anyone who wandered out there, I doubt that's the case. If it was, they were either just about to take off or they were really stupid smugglers. Last winter, I went into this abandoned parking lot under a closed shopping mall. It had 2 levels. The upper level had a bit of sunlight coming in through the windows, but the lower level was pitch black. I made my way down this wide ramp that the cars would use, and I decided to have a look at the bottom level. After turning my flashlight on, I noticed that the space was huge, much bigger than the upper level. I remember how the light danced through the many supporting pillars and cast vivid shadows. I said, "Hello," and "I'm just looking around," just to make my intentions clear, but was met with no response. So I decided to walk around for a bit, but couldn't see anything of interest. Just a lot of junk, some empty old bottles, but nothing that might indicate someone living or hanging around there. The place seemed completely abandoned. However, this uneasy feeling that someone might be hiding in the pitch-black shadow of one of these pillars took the better of me, and I climbed up the ramp. I left, taking a different route, and passed under an overhead clearing that snow had fallen through. Just as I was about to hop the fence and leave, I noticed that the patch of snow that had formed had footprints on it. I know this doesn't really sound horrifying when you read it, as the logical explanation was that some poor chap had probably taken shelter from the cold outside, inside the lot. But still, being there creeped the heck out of me. I don't know what's creepier, this place or you saying, "I'm just taking a look around to make sure nobody was there." If I were homeless and living in an abandoned place, I wouldn't respond to anybody saying, "I just want to look around." It seems like an easy way to make yourself a serial killer's next drifter victim. No thanks. Rural area landscape photography. Happen upon a long abandoned house and set up to snap a few images. Look in the window and it's perfectly furnished. Piano with music open, fishing gear, wood stove with fire nearby, magazines on coffee table, jackets on a coat rack, roll-top desk open with neatly stacked papers, family photos, small kitchen table with red tops and matching chairs, and one is pulled out. It was all covered in inches of dust. It looked like someone walked out in 1950 and never returned. That sounds equal parts haunting and beautiful. Although I'm not superstitious, my hackles would be up and I would be out of there at the first sign of any shadow that even looked vaguely ghost-like. Went to a closed-up mental hospital in my city with some friends at night. Everything was cool until we got to the basement, where there were 5-meter-wide and 4-meter-high lit tunnels going far to both directions. We headed down one and found a huge active generator. Then we went to the other way, and as we were about to hit another intersection, we saw 2 men wearing full green attire and face masks walking at the end of one of the corridors at 2 a.m. We got out of there real quick. This didn't happen to be in Northville, Michigan, did it? If so, it's really more of a teal outfit. Well, we found the crystal cook, guys. Went to an abandoned retirement home/assisted living facility. Turns out it became the home to a group of crazy homeless crystal addicts and one very angry raccoon. They did not like trespassers. The guardians of the galaxy have fallen on hard times. I was exploring a certain abandoned mill near a large city on the coast with a friend. We snuck in, messed around a bit, and realized that we only had one flashlight. Took turns, weird noises, dark inside because there's no power, evidence of homeless occupation, and empty needles. Real horror game material. We came up the stairway and turned a corner. Ahead is a walkway bridge, aka the way to the rest of the building. To the right is a pitch-black room that doesn't feel very nice. As we walk toward the bridge, the flashlight picks out a sign that says, "To Hell," and points towards this dark room. We didn't go in. It didn't feel right. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. My friends and I used to explore this old factory/processing plant. No idea what it was originally. Anyway, it had lots of underground sections that were pitch black, even a couple of meters from the entrance, but which also required going down a flight of stairs. One time we found a burned-out car 2 to 3 levels down. No idea how it got there, but that was kind of creepy. Another time we found a hole. We didn't bring torches or flashlights with us because we're idiots. But we had lighters and we were trying to figure out what the hole was or if it could lead anywhere. We put a stick in there and it ended up being at least 6 feet deep, but we also learned it was full of some liquid and that if we had fallen in we could have easily drowned in the dark. Another time we went a couple of levels down and one of us at the bottom started screaming shrieks of absolute terror and the rest of us thought that we were all going to be murdered. We all started running, everyone was screaming at this point, and there was this sludgy crap on the ground, and some of us slipped and fell just like in a gosh darn horror movie, slipping and sliding, our limbs out of control. Again, there's 6+ people screaming bloody freaking murder with absolute fear and terror on their faces, so we all thought we were going to get murdered. Turns out a baby bird had made a nest down there, and my sister got spooked and my friend screamed like an absolute baby. There was an abandoned hotel I was checking out. I gained access through a blown-out window near the indoor pool. It smelled like death inside. Came in to find a couple of bloated dead deer in the slime, collecting towards the deep end of the pool. That should have been my sign to go. I make my way into the lobby and banquet areas, and I come across a couple of raccoons and squirrels who scurry away swiftly. Nearly everything is destroyed, even the reception desk has been ripped in half. Nothing of interest to photograph, just trash. Neat little piles of trash. After a bit of searching, I find the stairwell. There's an odd noise coming from above that I brush off as rain. I decide to skip a couple of floors because they're probably in the same condition as the lobby, and a lot of the exterior windows had been blown out. I get to 4 and open the door, not worried about noise as I'm confident that I'm the only sober person on the premise, if not the only person. As I pull the door open, the rain noise suddenly ceases completely. I point my flashlight down the hallway and see hundreds of geese poke their heads out of the guest rooms. I remember the moment when nothing moved and we just stared at each other as lasting several minutes, although I'm sure it was about 10 seconds. Here I am in the middle of the hall, geese of abandoned luxury staring me down. Once the initial shock of the sight wears off, I remember I'm only looking at half the floor. Behind me, geese aren't pulling a deer in the headlights move, they're coming toward me. Time to go. I close the stairwell behind me, only muffling the cacophony that erupted once I moved. As I hustled down the stairs, I realized the signs were there. Goose crap everywhere. I hit the lobby and turn toward the pool where a group of geese has collected as if they were trying to trap me. Luckily, they're just dumb birds. I got out to find the exterior of the hotel swarming with the frickers. There was one lone sentinel standing on the roof, honking out a shrill command that the perimeter had been breached. Exploring an abandoned construction site. It's a site out in redneck country that's got a bunch of old construction vehicles getting overgrown with plants, and my girlfriend and I decide to check it out, to see what it's all about. We look around and don't see a whole lot. It's about to rain, so we decide to head out. As we're getting in my car, my girlfriend freezes and says, "There's a guy in the woods watching us." I crap myself and ask if she's sure. She repeats herself and says she saw her see him, and he laid flat on the ground to hide himself. We noped out of there real frickin' quick. I live in a large African city which still has a fair amount of undeveloped or undevelopable space. And one rule to remember is that there is always someone else there that you may not see. There are people who sit alone, very quietly, in bushes or between boulders and other such places. They are, I think, harmless and don't do anything. But what they are doing has been a mystery to me for the 10+ years I've been here. Most of them are too well dressed or well taken care of to be homeless. One annoying thing is that they stare at you, or at least they don't hide the fact that they're watching you. I swear, if there was some completely inaccessible cave high up in a cliff here, requiring professional scaling equipment to enter, they would find a local African guy just chilling inside with no discernible means of how he got there. I mean, honestly, if he can get up there along with his means of cooking and entertaining himself, that just deserves an applause more than anything. Got to admire the effort. This phenomenon of the people in abandoned spaces has raised some questions, detailed here. This is the funniest crap I've ever heard. Please work up the balls just to talk to one and see what's going on. Well, greetings are very important here, so if I stumble upon someone like that, I'm obliged to greet them. They just greet back normally as if we're neighbors passing on the street. But I don't stop and talk because I don't know what they're doing. I've encountered this too in Madagascar. I'm not exactly sure what it's about. There it's just mostly older folks. Maybe they've reached a point in life where their kids are taking care of them, and they're respected, so they just hang out and think. I guess a lot of the ones I see are older, that's true. I went to the abandoned living complex in Pennsylvania called Concrete City. We walked around a bunch of the buildings and stuff. At one point, one of my friends yelled, "Rich, come here!" I ran over, and there they were, 2 little kittens on a staircase, with the words "Cloud Swag" spray-painted above them. We brought them home, and I kept one. He still terrorizes me every day. When I was in college, a few friends and I went to this local abandoned hotel. It was a swanky place back in the 50s, but had just been sitting around abandoned and fenced off ever since. We walked by and saw an open window on a second-story ledge and ended up finding an old wooden ladder nearby on the property. We went in and hung around a bit and saw a bit of great graffiti. The whole place was trashed with actual garbage as well as bits of the building that were falling apart. We made it up the staircase to the 3rd floor, looking in each of the rooms. The area we were in used to be the housing for the staff of the hotel. The 3rd floor was covered in garbage from throughout the years. We got to the last room on the 3rd floor and looked in it to find a lit candle, with no one else around. Realizing we weren't alone, we booked it out of there, and once we were outside, looked up to see someone watching us from one of the windows. Now, we went to college in a city with a significant homeless problem and assumed we'd just stumbled onto someone's home, but still, that crap freaked us out. They cemented up the place after another explorer fell down an open elevator shaft and broke his legs, and it has recently been renovated and they're turning it into an apartment building. Not the creepiest find, but definitely freaked us out in the moment. In conclusion, searching an abandoned hotel, we found a lit candle that wasn't ours and was secretly watched by a squatter on the way out. This happened 8 years ago when I was a sophomore in high school. My urban explorer friends and I were on a bike ride looking for cool places to explore in a relatively dilapidated area when we discovered a really creepy cave. An old abandoned cement mine, we later learned. We did some mild exploring that first day, but quickly realized it would require a lot more gear to thoroughly explore. Flashlights, respirators, etc. About a week later, 5 of us came back with the proper gear and a camera to see what we could find in the mine. We discovered that there was basically one main shaft that sloped downward and deeper into the earth, so we followed that main route. It was wide enough for a car to drive down and was pretty well graded, so the walking was easy. There were many rooms, old machinery, and rusting equipment off this main shaft, but we mostly avoided it in the beginning. We were trying not to get lost or confused. Along the way, the walls were littered with the classic abandoned graffiti, X was here, swastikas, initials and dates, phallic drawings, etc. As we got deeper and deeper, the graffiti really thinned out. At this point, the light from the entrance was long gone, and we were relying solely on flashlights. The air was so stagnant and hazy with particles that the light from our flimsy flashlights would only go 20 feet or so before getting totally obscured by dust. Thank goodness for the respirators. The glow sticks we had bought to mark our way to prevent getting lost were also basically useless because they would disappear in the haze only a few steps after dropping them, and we had only brought 10 or so. At this point, we started arguing amongst ourselves. Several of the crew was nervous about going any deeper with the air quality being so terrible, and without a good way to prevent us from getting lost. We were probably a quarter mile into the earth now. The rest of us managed to override that sentiment of fear by assuring them that the path was easy and straightforward, so we'd have to try to get lost. We were going to rely on our level-headedness, sense of direction, and flashlight battery life to get out. Despite the agreement to push on, it was becoming very creepy for everyone. We walked for a while in silence, hearing nothing but our own movements and the steady drip of water coming from somewhere deep in the cave. I think we were all pretty scared at this point, but no longer willing to admit that to each other. Then we stumbled across something that made us all stop cold. Dug into the side of the deep stone shaft we were slowly descending was a tunnel, an offshoot. It was narrow, you'd have to crouch to go through it, and it was also a good few feet off the ground, so it required a scramble to reach it. But that wasn't what made us stop, it was the graffiti. We hadn't seen any for 10 minutes or so and assumed that the artists never came this deep. But someone else clearly had, and the message they left us was ominous. The tunnel was lined with words written in white, all of them somehow relating to death and destruction. Scrawled throughout the tunnel were words like suffering, pain, plague, disease, and hell. It was pretty terrifying. Who else would come this far just to write such terrible messages in a mysterious tunnel that broke off from the main path? But there was no turning back now. We had to see where the tunnel led to. Despite our fear, we were overpowered by intense curiosity. So one by one, we crawled through the tunnel to the other side. What we found was a strange flooded chamber. Around the pool of water were many large stones, each covered in dozens of burned-out tea candles. There must have been hundreds of used tea candles in the place. The walls had a few creepy monster faces, poorly graffitied on them, and the tunnel entrance back to the main shaft was ringed with a spray-painted, blood-stained mouth. What was this place? Some weird ritual site for local Satan worshippers? An elaborate hoax set up by a bunch of kids? We couldn't find much evidence to figure it all out, and we were running out of adrenaline to keep exploring. We all crawled out of that weird hellhole and back into the main shaft, where we promptly headed toward the exit. When we finally saw that pincrack of natural light coming from the real world outside, we were flooded with relief. We never did figure out what that mysterious cavern was for, and I think I'm content to leave it a mystery. No, we didn't hear any monsters in the depths of the tunnel, or find any bloody Satan praises themselves, but just finding that room, buried deep in an old forgotten mine, was enough to creep us all out for a long time. Lawyers and law enforcers. What are the most common laws people understand incorrectly? Many people assume that if the police, in the USA, don't read you your Miranda rights when you're arrested, it means you win the case. Not so. It only means that you may get things you said excluded from trial, if you said them in response to police interrogation while in custody. I got arrested and they didn't read my rights until we got back to the station. Unlike in movies and TV, where they read them right away usually. The whole time I had a shred of hope that they would forget and I would get off because of that. It can ruin the DA's entire case, however, particularly if the person who is arrested makes the classic mistake of talking to the cops. Basically, if they don't read you your Miranda rights and you subsequently confess to the crime, that confession goes out the window, along with anything they've got on you as a consequence of that confession. For example, you confessing and telling them where your stash was, etc. Unless they can convincingly prove that it was not as a result of that. For a lot of minor crimes, the DA actually will not pursue it if your Miranda rights weren't read to you, as the level of difficulty has increased too much. I should point out the above only applies to evidence gained after arrest while the police are interrogating you. I'm just clarifying that's what I'm referring to, not you spontaneously confessing in the back of the cop car. The European Court of Human Rights has nothing to do with the EU. Actually, I did not know this. It's not quite true. The ECTHR initially had nothing to do with the EU, but now the EU is a signatory and EU countries have to be signatories. Tell that to the tabloids. I hate seeing the two conflated so often. Is this a common error where you're from? It's kind of willful ignorance on behalf of people in the UK who think we should leave the EU for no reason other than recovering our sovereign power. Lawyer here. I like when people say, "I'll see you in court." No, you won't. Most of us rarely ever go through a full-blown jury trial like on TV. We avoid jury trials as they're expensive and time-consuming. But saying, "My attorney will see your attorney at a settling table at one of their offices to work out a reasonable agreement," doesn't quite have the same ring to it. I like that one better. Feels less like an escalation. Less, "You will be hurt for this," and more, "This'll get sorted out by professionals. This is my pro's number. Have your pro call them." Cheers. No, as a dramatic diva of a man, I have to say that not being able to scream, "See you in court," at the slightest inconvenience would be a significant detractor from my life's enjoyment. That you're entitled to one phone call from jail if you're arrested. This is not actually a constitutional requirement or even a nationwide standard. Telephones wouldn't need to be invented at the time of the drafting of the Constitution in order for a constitutional requirement, or right, to attach to the technology. Case in point, the Supreme Court's unanimous decision this week that a warrant is required to search a person's cell phone, an extension of constitutional search and seizure protections to cell phones, which didn't exist until 1872, more than 20 years after Thomas Edison invented the Constitution. That some of your rights only apply to the government. Yes, a private citizen or business owner can certainly inhibit your right to free speech. More people need to recognize this. As a weapon owner, my individual right to own and carry a sidearm ends the moment I go from a public place into a private business or residence abode. If they disagree with me, they have the right to remove me from their premises however they see fit, as I'm now infringing upon their right to exercise, or not exercise, their Second Amendment rights within their walls. I use the Second Amendment as an example because it's the easiest to convey since there's a physical object involved. This applies equally to all rights though. In the cliché example of shouting, "Fire!" in a crowded theater, this person is infringing upon the exercise of a business's First Amendment rights. Because they would be within the walls of that business, the business rights trump their right to say what they want. Furthermore, in the theater example, the person who shouted fire could also be charged for needlessly causing mass hysteria, which is against the law as well. Freedom of speech is restricted in certain cases. Almost. Fire in a movie theater is an example of limits to free speech in a public space, as it threatens the livelihood of your co-citizens. It's an example of the clear and present danger portion of the incitement test, which is commonly known as the prohibition of inspiring an angry mob into action with free speech. So yes, if the US had a Tahrir Square and it was filled with angry protesters, you might not be allowed to get on a megaphone and demand revolution. It would depend on how likely the protesters would be moved to violence in the near future. I like to joke that you can advocate the overthrow of a government until there's a chance of anything actually happening about it. Businesses are not required to accept your 10-pound bag of pennies because it's legal tender. It just means that you can use that to pay and debts that you have. And as you're not in debt to that business, yes, they can refuse your legal tender. This concept came up on Reddit a while back. What I took from it was that McDonald's can refuse your money, but Applebee's can't. Yes, when you want to eat something at McDonald's, you're effectively proposing a trade for the food. When you want to eat something at Applebee's, you're going into debt for the cost of your meal. All debts in the US must be able to be paid off with US currency, but no one has to accept an offer to trade with US currency. It depends on whether you're considered a debtor or not. For instance, if you're attempting to purchase something, then you're not in debt to the store and they can refuse to accept the payment. However, if you tow my car, impound it, and then tell me that I'm in your debt for X dollars, and that you will not return my car until then you would have to accept X dollars worth of pennies unless there was some existing contract between us that said otherwise. That only the government or the government employees acting in their official capacity can violate a person's federal constitutional rights. To use a somewhat outdated example, the Duck Dynasty guy has a First Amendment right to say what he wants, but A&E can fire him for it, call him up, rehire him, fire him for practicing his Second Amendment rights, call him up, rehire him again, and fire him for petitioning the government. They may be violating American ideals, state constitutions, or federal and state statutes, but they are not violating his First Amendment rights because the Constitution only binds the federal government, and selectively state governments through the 14th Amendment. A&E is not a government entity, so the federal Constitution doesn't prohibit it from doing anything. I hate how no one on my Facebook seems to understand this. People seem to think that pleading insanity means getting off. Generally, you go to the mental health facility until you're cured. Possibly forever, well, just until a board of doctors are willing to bet their reputations that you won't break any more laws, instead of prison for X years. The amount of time spent locked up after a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity is almost always longer than the amount of time that would have been served if found guilty. However, sometimes, the institute is a much better place than the prison you would have ended up in. You never really hear about mental health facility gangs. They think they see you, but it's just the schizophrenia kicking in. Basic federalism principles, the idea that federal law trumps state law. Mary J may have been legalized in a given state, but you're still breaking federal law, which still classifies green herb as a Schedule 1 controlled substance. So sure, the state police won't arrest you, but the DEA can still arrest you. Furthermore, and I can't stress this enough, if you're in federal territory of any kind, green herb is illegal. California respects medical green herb. If you have a card, that's great. But once you step into Yosemite National Park, it is illegal, and the Eastern District of California is more than welcome to prosecute your rear end for possession. It's strange, I would have thought that a national park would be a great place to wander off, have some green herb, and feel close to nature. Although I feel like this particular law isn't going to stop many people from doing so. Age of consent. Most states have a sliding scale. In Missouri, it's 17, but if you're under 21, your partner can be 14 years old. However, laws on publishing videos and pictures of it are different for obvious reasons. You can legally do the deed with your 17-year-old partner, but you can't take pictures of it. There is case law exactly on this situation. Also, marginal tax rates, more accounting than legal, but they are tax laws. A lot of people believe that your entire income is taxed at a certain rate based on how much income you made that year. Rather, it's a sliding scale where the first portion is not taxed at all, then another portion is taxed at a low percentage, then the next portion is taxed higher, and so on. If I knew the percentages, I would quote them, but I'm not looking them up. Sadly, the ACA was not created this way and can create some really dangerous income issues for people receiving subsidies. Oh man, I'm an engineer and some of my coworkers still don't understand marginal tax. You'll still hear talk of, I hope I only get a 2.9% raise this year, because 3% will bump me up into the next tax bracket. It's baffling. Some of the most commonly misunderstood ones, they can't arrest a husband and wife for the same crime. If you don't sign any documents, you can't be found guilty. Yar, take to the sea. Do not remove this tag under penalty of law except by the consumer. No, you won't go to jail for ripping tags off mattresses or pillows. The consumer is allowed to remove the tag. Are you sure? Actually, yes and yes. The tags are regulated for businesses that sell them, so the consumer can know what they're buying. So this all came about because at one point, companies were advertising one thing and selling consumers something else. There are so many cases where government regulation makes sense and is the only thing protecting the swimmers from the sharks. Exactly. Without these tags, manufacturers could fill mattresses, pillows, etc. with any material, even material from used mattresses. Yuck. Once you buy it, you can rip the tag off. I'm afraid I'm gonna have to pull rank on you. I didn't want to have to do this. I'm with the mattress police. There are no tags on these mattresses. I get tons of calls asking if they can get a divorce for adultery or abandonment. This is despite the fact that most states, Ohio and New York being the only holdouts, did away with fault divorce over 30 years ago. In Kentucky, we went no fault divorce in 1973. Long story short, in an argument with my then wife while on the phone with my lawyer, found out she had cheated, She screamed that infidelity was not grounds for divorce. My lawyer replied, "She is correct, but infidelity is grounds for a custody suit." You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm in law school right now, and many people in Germany don't exactly know the lifelong prison sentence. It's not really lifelong like some people believe. It's imprisonment for an indefinite time period, but minimum 15 years. The average lifelong prison term is about 20 years. This varies by country, and in the USA, by state. If you get a life sentence in the state of Pennsylvania, you will die in prison, barring appeals or revocation of sentence. Other states, like California, are like Germany, where a life sentence can mean you're eligible for parole after a predetermined amount of time. Lawyer here. All of them. People are idiots. Redditors especially. Breaking Bad taught me that, contrary to popular belief, undercover police officers are not required to answer truthfully when you ask, "Are you a cop?" Long story short, don't sell substances. I never quite understood how people could believe this was possible. Probably because they confuse it with entrapment. Entrapment is baiting people unreasonably to do something they wouldn't normally do. Undercover is pretending you're not a cop to see what people normally do. Bird law. People think they can keep hummingbirds as pets, but they're illegal tender. Not saying I agree, it's just the bird laws in this country. It's not governed by reason. Let's say you and I go toe-to-toe on bird law and see who comes out the victor. Filibuster? Thank you to everyone for furthering this debate on the very important points of law raised in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. How your stuff gets distributed when you die. No, it doesn't all go to your husband or wife most of the time. No, your $10 LegalZoom rocket lawyer will is not good enough most of the time. Estate planning attorneys don't pay the bills by selling wills or power of attorney. People who die without wills or with poorly drafted wills keep our lights on. When my father died intestate, that is, without a will, the laws of the state specified that half of his estate went to his wife, my mother, and the rest was divided amongst his children, me, my brother, and my half-sister. That was simple enough until my half-sister became estranged from the rest of the family and was out of touch with my mother, her stepmother. And then my father's mother died intestate, leaving money and property to my father's estate and his living sister, my aunt. My father's share of my grandmother's estate needed to be split, half to my mother and 1/6 to each of my father's kids, but nobody knew where my half-sister was. Eventually, several years later, a company wanted to acquire rights to some of the property that had been my grandmother's. An agent of that company had to track down all the heirs and discovered that my half-sister had died. That agent was then in the awkward position of telling my mom that her stepdaughter was dead. Oh wow, I've been waiting for this question. Being protected from discrimination does not mean that you're protected from buttholes. In other words, your employer or co-worker is allowed to decide he doesn't like you, which means he's discriminated between you and another person, so long as he hasn't made that decision based upon your race, color, or religious belief. In other words, you're not entitled to employment. The only thing you're entitled to is to not be discriminated against based on something out of your control, such as your skin color or your gender. The age at which a child in the United States can decide which parent they wish to reside with is, wait for it, 18. Yeah, that's right. If you're a child, you're not allowed to make decisions for yourself. That is up to the family court judge to make based upon the best interests of the child. We have free speech in this country. That means that if someone says something to you that you don't like, you can't sue them for libel or slander unless all of the following apply. Number 1, it's false. 2, it's been communicated to a third party, not just to you. 3, it affects your reputation for morality in the community. And 4, you have suffered either or both emotional and physical health repercussions as a result of the statement, or financial repercussions, or all 3. There are certain things that, if said, do not require number 4, such as a statement that you have a venereal disease. That's called slander per se, but these are rare statements, so usually you need number 4. Double jeopardy, thanks to the movie of the same name. Please expand. What is misunderstood about this? In the movie, a woman is convicted of murdering her husband. Once she gets out, she finds out that he's still alive and set her up for murder. She then hunts him down and murders him for real because she can't be tried for the same crime twice. Double jeopardy actually means you can't be tried twice for the same instance of crime, but it doesn't mean that if you were falsely accused of one crime, you now have free rein to go commit that crime for real. In that situation, the two crimes are not the exact same occurrence of a crime. One was a previous crime, and one was a totally separate, later crime. As another example, let's say Guy A is arrested for beating up Guy B on charges of assault and battery. Years later, Guy A beats up Guy B again. Arresting and trying him a second time would not be a double jeopardy in the real world, but it would be under the logic of the movie. A good way to demonstrate the other side of double jeopardy is the O.J. Simpson case. He was tried in criminal court, possible prison sentence, and found innocent. He was later tried in civil court, basically only fines and settlements, and found guilty. Double jeopardy means that you can't be tried for the same instance of a crime in the same court. You can still be tried in the other, civil and criminal court, for the same instance of the crime. So don't go write a book about how you committed a crime after getting off at one court. Actually a lawyer here, and there haven't been many stories from other actual lawyers here because we don't want any of you to think that we've given you some kind of legal advice that you're going to end up relying on that turns out wrong for wherever you live. For example, if you're in Ohio, I could probably give you some solid advice. Any of the other 49 states or any other countries? Not so much. Sure, there are general rules that we all get from the SCOTUS, but even that can be open to interpretation by lower courts, and SCOTUS typically set floors or ceilings. Miranda, for example, sets forth the minimum warnings that police are supposed to give you. Some state could easily add more warnings to that. So it makes it kind of hard for us to give you guys advice on this stuff because depending on where you live, we might be wrong. There we have it, folks. I will note that I remove a lot of the not a lawyer headings because otherwise they get repetitive, and we should take note that most of these posts are both from the questioned profession and bystanders. I just pick the stories that seem credible-ish and entertaining. A hostile work environment is not illegal in and of itself, it's only unlawful if, among other things, the hostility is based on a protected characteristic such as race, gender, age, disability, religion, etc. In short, it's not illegal for your boss to be a butthole, it's illegal for the butthole to single people out because they belong to a protected class, though. I think people commonly confuse assault and battery. Assault is threat of imminent harm. Battery is unlawful physical contact. In the UK, if I punch you from behind, that's battery. If you see me punching you, assault and battery. Assault is fearing imminent violence upon yourself. It's not someone punching you. It's what happens before someone punches you and you fear being attacked. In Canada, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms only protects you from the government impeding the rights laid out in the document, not from other private entities doing it. My divorce lawyer friend says common law marriage. There are only 9 states that recognize it, and even then it's not clear-cut. Someone will be breaking up with someone after 10 years and tell her they get half, right? Because of common law marriage. Sorry, not in this state, she always has to tell them. In the US, specifically Texas, jurisdictions vary, you do not have the right to a free attorney for criminal cases. The law states that you have the right to have an attorney represent you. If you cannot afford one, then one will be provided for you. My judge, an IMA prosecutor, routinely denies the public defender for people requesting a lawyer after looking at their financial situation. The person who throws the first punch is not necessarily the offender. New Zealand here. No, you can't sue anyone like they do in America. Full stop. End of story. Don't ask me again. Get out of the courthouse. You don't need a body to prove a murder. You just need to show so much evidence that a missing person is dead and has been murdered by the suspect to prove murder. This has led to some misunderstandings. There are 2 falsely held beliefs that are sort of related. One, that you never have to give the police your consent to a search. If they have the ability to search your car or property, they wouldn't be asking you for consent. You wouldn't believe how many people don't understand this. 2, the police and their agents can and will lie to you. People seem to think driving under the influence means actually driving. Drunk and in your car with the keys within reach? Yeah, that's a DUI. Doesn't matter if the engine wasn't running, at least in most states. Which, to be fair, is a pretty crappy law, but you're right about how it works. Not a law per se, but the concept of judicial review. I'm amazed at how many people struggle with the idea that when the US Supreme Court hands down an opinion on a question of federal law, be it constitutional law, statutory interpretation, or what have you, that the court's word is final. That is, of course, until the law changes, from a constitutional amendment, congressional repeal, modification, enactment of statute, etc. Freedom of speech means that the government can't arrest you, fine you, etc. for anything you say, barring conspiracy to commit a crime or hate speech. It in no law protects you from any other consequence, such as an employer firing you, an establishment banning you, etc.